Tim Parrish writes in the New York Daily News, quote, "I grew up a Southern racist. I learned how to hate at home and at church. I drank from the same poisonous well as Dylan Roof." And Tim Parrish, author of Fear and What Follows the Violent Education of a Christian Racist, joins me now here in New York. So Tim, thank you so much. Listen, I read much of what you wrote this morning, and you were incredibly candid, and you talk about how through the years you're pushing through your feelings. But, right. I mean, take me back. You grew up in the Deep South in Louisiana in the 60s and 70s. Right. As far as, you know, color lines were at the time, tell me about the community.
Right. Well, thanks so much for having me. I wish it were for different reasons, yeah. But it's great to be here. It's a conversation we need to continue. Yeah. Well, I grew up in a very segregated society. I remember black and white restrooms and water fountains. My family were really good, hard-working, working-class people, and Christians, except for this gigantic flaw that our church voted not to have African Americans in, and you know there was a lot of vitriol toward African Americans. And I didn't have an African American kid in my class until 7th grade, so I lived in a world where African Americans weren't individuals.
You lived in a world of white.
That's right. That's exactly right.
How often growing up as a young person, as a teen, would you use the N-word?
All the time. It's the word we used, and I wasn't even aware of it being a racial epithet or anything being a racial epithet until I was 4 years old, and my mother and I were at a department store, and there was a black kid behind me, and I said, I'm going to use this word on TV, but I said, "Look, Mom, there's a little jigaboo," and she kind of snatched me up, took me outside, and said, "Look, outside we don't say words like that. Outside we say Negro," which was the acceptable word at that point. And at that moment I realized there was something going on in our house that was shameful. And so really, from her reaction, and again, my mother was a wonderful person.
But she says outside, meaning when I hear you say that, that means it's okay to say it inside the house.
Exactly.
This is how you were raised.
That's right.
You talk about, in this piece I read also in the Daily Beast, you talk about how you escaped becoming Dylan Roof, the 23-year-old who murdered those 9 people in that Charleston church. And you talk about your thoughts of torching a home.
Yes.
Of African Americans.
Right.
You went that far in your head.
I did.
Tell me about that.
Well, it began, the indoctrination, and that's what I'm talking about a lot, is how we in white society are indoctrinated. We still are indoctrinated. Our indoctrination lies deep in us. For me, obviously, it started when I was very young. Then, when I was about 13, I got in a really bad street fight. Happened to be with white kids, but I got very scared and then fell under the sway of this charismatic, brutal, kind of superhuman racist on my street. And I thought that would keep me safe. But I also thought being a racist would make me more acceptable to my father, to everybody around me.
You fit in.
That's exactly right, which I think is the motive behind a lot of young men who are doing these kind of atrocious things. And our neighborhood was naturally desegregating, so there was fear of the black invaders. And I feared for my parents. I could see they were afraid.
Black invaders, my goodness.
Yeah.
But you didn't. You didn't do this to a home. You didn't torch the home.
Right.
And help me understand, when you were so indoctrinated in this culture and in this family with these friends, how did you start switching? How did you turn that racist switch, start trying to turn it off?
Well, I knew the whole time what I was doing was wrong. Yeah, because I was raised in a Christian church and I was locked in on Jesus. And it was always perplexing to me why in the church itself there was a different message from what I heard Jesus saying. So luckily, like Lincoln, there was always this better angel inside of me. And when the reason for our desire to burn the house was a friend of ours was stabbed and almost killed in a fight started by my racist mentor. And then the racist mentor guy really was losing his mind and needed me for support. And I had sort of split off from him. But I again convinced myself we were somehow protecting our neighborhood out of a sense of honor, which was insane. But when we came up to it, I was like, this is just murder. I know better. I'm not going to do it.
But that's the difference between you. I'm looking at you and I'm seeing this face flash out of my periphery. You know, the difference is obviously you stopped. You had that sense inside of you. And there is still so much. First of all, I applaud you for being able to come on national television and say, yes, I have had racist thoughts for years and years, and how, you know, you've been battling these poisonous thoughts and have been trying to turn your heart and your head around.
Right.
But, you know, there are way too many of Dylan
Yes.
Roofs out there. And so how will we ever, as a society, someone who has lived how you've lived, ever stop being like this?
Yeah. Well, I want to say my main point is, you know, people who are caught in situations like Dylan Roof aren't really my audience. My audience, I hope I can reach them, but I've been attacked by people much more mainstream than Dylan Roof since my article came out and since my book came out. And what bothers me the most is there's really a mainstream racist indoctrination among us. I'm a good example of it. I still at times, and I say this in my article, you know, at times the N-word pops into my head on really
Still
bad
in current
days.
day.
Of course, because it's always in me. And I've just gotten past the point of being ashamed of it and saying, that's what I've got. Now I got to back it off, look logically, see human faces. And it's not hard. I mean, it's not easy work, but it's essential work, and we as white people need to do it.
Tim Parrish, author of Fear and What Follows the Violent Education of a Christian Racist. Thank you for your candor.
Thanks for having me.